We received a lot of info about possible terrorist attacks. My husband told me right away they were Chechens. He threatened me with a gun. I'll shoot you like a dog. They looked like prisoners from World War II documentaries. Pull out the troops. They want peace. They began to storm the building. They deceived us. 70% of Alpha Group will die. Most of the hostages will be dead too. We had to stand next to the windows and wave the bed sheets. If we had taken these terrorists down in 1995, we would have avoided apartment bombings, Nordost, and the Beslan tragedies. I do not think there's a direct connection. I did not expect Chernomyrdin to talk to Basaev. Yes, Mr. Chernomyrdin. I received a telegram from Yeltsin which said no aviation use and no explanation. Who said that we cannot talk and negotiate? Hi everyone, we're in Budyonnovsk. This is a key city of Stavropol region. 25 years ago, in June 1995, the first massive hostage attack of contemporary Russia took place here. A group of around 200 militants, led by Shamil Basaev, this was the time that his name became widely known, arrived from Chechnya to attack the city, kill more than 100 people, and seize the local hospital. Here it is, behind my back. All patients, all doctors, and hundreds of people who were captured by Basaev's militants in the city were taken hostage. There were about 1,500 people captured in the building. On the third day, troops tried to storm the hospital. It was a failure. The militants fired heavily, hiding behind human shields from the hostages. About 30 of them died. 3 Alpha fighters were killed. President Boris Yeltsin was away at the time. He was at the Group of 8 summit in Canada. Victor Chernomyrdin was entitled to be the one in charge. He did an incredible thing that we cannot imagine happening now. In order to save the hostages, he called Basaev and promised to do what the militants asked for. Hello, Shamil Basaev. As a result of these negotiations, Shamil Basaev released most of the hostages. In return, he received buses, and using 123 hostages for self-protection, the militants went back to Chechnya and vanished there. It's been 25 years. However, we still have 2 questions to ask. Firstly, was Chernomyrdin right when he launched negotiations with a terrorist, allowing them to leave and saving hundreds of lives in return? Should they have let the militants reach Chechnya? Or should they have shot them all, sacrificing the lives of the hostages who went along with them? This whole situation was completely unexpected. We knew about the war only from the news, nothing more. Everything was all right here. We lived peacefully together. You did not expect that Chechen militants might attack then. Yeah, you know, before the war, many Chechen people lived here. Really? Yeah, they just suddenly left later. After the attack? Yes. 2 days before the militants attacked Budyonnovsk, we received a telegram message sent by Igor Mezhakov, my assistant in Grozny. He was saying an attack was being planned. If you knew about the attack 2 days before, why didn't you do anything? Well, I've talked about it many times. Too much information about possible terrorist attacks was going around. Our eyes were swimming. Yeah, we knew about a possible attack. But what can you do to prevent it? We had 80 to 100,000 people working there. But no one could seal off the whole Chechen Republic. It's impossible. Militants led by Basaev entered Budyonnovsk from Dagestan. They came along this road. They came in 3 military trucks. The militants were inside. It was around 200 of them. I think they couldn't even sit down. The trucks were so packed. A Zhiguli car was driving in front of them. It was painted like a police car. It is said that they did not aim to attack Budyonnovsk. They aimed for Mineralny Vody city, based on what Basaev said later. Right here, they were supposed to turn left. Mineralny Vody is in that direction. They made it through many checkpoints. The estimated number was between 52 and 68. Basaev was proud of himself, saying they could have made it further if they had not run out of money. To be fair, I totally agree with you. It was a crime. There was a serious conversation after that. Viktor Yerin understood that it was his people who did the wrong thing. So, both Victor and I left office 2 weeks after the incident. Other people in charge resigned too. You mean he realized that the police allowed the militants to go through the checkpoints? Of course he did. We had enough time to discuss everything during 3 days in the operation headquarters. They probably did not pay money to get through. The thing is that one of the militants who was wearing a police uniform used to be a real policeman, and he knew how to talk to people at checkpoints. The so-called policeman was saying that they were military men and had Cargo 200 from Chechnya in their trucks. Step away, we are delivering the dead bodies from the war. I was called 40 minutes in advance. I was at my office. 3 military trucks passed by, Russian trucks with flags painted on the sides. Well, not painted, depicted. I didn't know it back then, but now I assume they took over the trucks as a result of the military actions. That's why they had flags on the cars. And they also had a police car. Yeah. They painted all the necessary stripes on that car, too. No one was surprised to see people from the Caucasus driving a car. Back then, we had Dagestan, Chechen, and Nogais officers, and so on. No one cared about their nationality. Anyway, the head of the Budyonnovsk police thought the column of trucks was suspicious and told to stop them here on Proskoviysk roundabout. He said to take them to the local police and have them checked. That was what was done. On this fatal crossroads, Basaev's militants turned right instead of turning left, as it was planned. That's the road to Budyonnovsk. We had a guard on the first floor. He saw them coming from that side. From that side? Yes. You could drive through this road before. Someone is coming. I asked who they were. I don't know any people from the Caucasus. Some of them had green headbands. Did you feel something was wrong? I felt anxious because I did not know who they were. They also refused to have their cars checked. I had a gun. I checked that it was loaded, just in case. I said, I will go outside and talk to them. I came out to the corridor. The gun is loaded. I walked for about 20 meters or so. It felt like an earthquake. I couldn't understand what was going on. About 70 of them. They opened fire in front of the police office. I was confused. Did they spread along this road and begin the storm? They arrived here, one car after another, and they started jumping out. Man who was waiting for me to come out went out to call someone and saw those huge guys. Some of them were wearing green uniforms. They had miniguns and rifle cartridges with them. He was wondering where these people came from. One of our policemen went to the alert unit, but he was killed on the way. The policemen shot back from outside, trying to defend themselves. However, the militants did not aim to destroy our department. And yes, our staff was defending themselves with machine guns. They did not seize us. You think it was not their aim? Yeah, I think it was not. Did the terrorists leave this place to go to the city center? Yes, they headed to the city center. They were driving and shooting. Shooting, but not seizing yet. The first act of this tragedy is played out here, on the central city square. This is the House of Children's Art in front of the administration. The market is there. Militants headed that way too, and shot random people dead. Others were taken hostage and brought here to the square. The militants took cars away from the local people and used them to drive around the city. They carried on random shooting and taking people to this square. People were told to wait for further instructions here. 2 or 3 of them stopped our car and told us to get out. Did you understand who they were? I did not, but my husband did. He said they were Chechen people. They had their faces covered. We could only see their eyes. We were told to leave our car. They started swearing. My husband asked them to watch their language because we had our kids with us. They stopped us, and one of the Chechen guys was swearing. I told him to watch his mouth. You Russian whores, I can even say it on camera. You blankety-blank sluts. You know what, my darling? We're the same as your women, tired of hard housework. Lena was there too. She told me to keep quiet. Why do I need to bear this humiliation? You're never at a loss for words, are you? Exactly. Who is this guy to insult me? Did he screw me? Who do you think you are? Then this guy said, I will be protecting you, both of you. People were walking to the square from different places of the town. I don't remember when exactly, but they took a petrol tank to the center of the square. What for? The police sent helicopters over. The militants thought they might start bombing. Later, we were taken here. The whole square was filled with people. At some point, people were asked to form a column, which was driven out in that direction. Then, they turned right and headed straight to the hospital. Militants carried on shooting random people dead. They beat up people on the way. About 100 people died that day. We walked along Pushkinskaya Street to Milzavod, along Kalinin Avenue, and then to the hospital. Did it feel like you were war captives? Yeah, we walked in columns. There were a lot of us. I saw this column with my own eyes from the surgery room window on the second floor. We were performing a surgery at that time. A nurse looked out the window. You can see who's coming to the front of the building from that floor. She told us to look outside too. The people looked like World War II captives. They were exactly the same. It was a huge crowd. People in uniforms, holding guns, were guarding them on the sides. We stopped at the square in front of the hospital. Militants destroyed some of the local food shops. There were a lot of them. It was really hot, around 40 degrees Celsius. The militants broke into the shops to give us some water and chocolate sweets for our children. They handed out sweets and water to the children? Yes. So they were humane to some extent. Yes, to some extent. There was just one cruel guy. We saw him both on the square and on the way to the hospital. He was beating people with his rifle. He looked like his eyes were narrow. Maybe he was Korean. People called him Kazakh. We heard about him a lot. Yeah, he was very cruel. I saw him beating a young guy. When we arrived at the hospital, we were divided into 2 groups. Men to the left, women to the right. We have 3 floors and 2 buildings in the hospital. A separate infection department and a separate trauma department. Somewhere at the end of the first day, closer to the evening, the militants brought the employees and the patients from those buildings to the main building and completely blocked it. After the terrorist attack in Budyonnovsk hospital, expensive repairs would be made. A new building with the best medical equipment in the region would be built. But back in June of 1995, this was a typical district hospital. The infection department that Dr. Chepurina was talking about is here. This is the trauma department, and here is the main building, where the main events would play out in the next 5 days. That day I was at my apprenticeship there, and I heard the shots somewhere around noon. At first, all this was perceived as a salute. No one could even think that it would end up like this. With the first wounded, I entered the hospital through the ER. It used to be. You came in over there? Yes. And there were Chechens inside already? There were the first victims. And when did the terrorist enter the hospital? In fact, around 2 p.m. already. And at this time, I got a call. Nikolaevich, come here. It was a call from my department, the trauma department. Yes, the trauma department. There are a lot of wounded. I left the children, I loaded the gun, shoot back, get in the bathtub. I couldn't leave my colleagues. Do you understand? All my colleagues were wounded, and I was at home. I tried to go outside. My guys wouldn't let me because the bullets were flying there. They were saying, "Where are you going? Are you crazy?" I walked, ducking. I came here. There was a canteen. One driver was sitting there and shaking. "What is it?" I said. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't even say a single word. I came here. There were bigger bushes here. Machine gun belts flew out from the bushes, just like during the Civil War. They grabbed my hands. "Are you from the FSB?" he asked me. I said, "No, I'm a doctor." "You're an idiot, doctor. Everyone's running away from here. Why did you, an idiot, come here while everyone else is running away?" These were the militants? Yes, they were the militants. They grabbed my hands and pushed me with their knee against my butt to go up to the second floor. All my colleagues from the department were already all standing in a row. They saw me and said, "Thank God, the boss has come." They said, "Are you their boss?" "Yes." "All right, we'll let you go." And then the work began. I was given a nurse's robe, and I walked around the wards like a nurse, cleaning. And why did you do it? There was such a belief that the medical staff was not being touched. I was in a robe. And that made you feel safer? Well, yes. How did you know you were a hostage? By accident, really. At first, all this was somehow seen a bit unreal. I thought that maybe it was some kind of joke or something. Until the last minute, we were sure that they would simply scare us and move on, because they allegedly had intentions to fight both the federal forces and the police, and they played it out so skillfully, telling ordinary civilians that they had no claims against them personally, that they only had claims against military structures exclusively. And when, by the end of the working day, my colleagues asked a question, "Can we go home?" Especially the doctors who were working. They said, "No, you will stay with us. If anything, we'll let you go when it's necessary." "Yes, we'll be back." "No, stay." Well, we stayed. Here is the main building of Budyonnovsk Hospital. It's now surrounded by tall trees on all sides. It seems that it's located in the forest. 25 years ago, these trees were much lower, and this whole area was perfectly visible. There were so many hostages on all 3 floors, in the basement, in the offices, in the corridors, everywhere. Basaev himself organized his headquarters in the residence room. The windows overlook that side. The first thing the terrorists did is they shot everyone who was in uniform, policemen and military personnel. There was a helicopter regiment stationed here in Budyonnovsk, and there are a lot of military personnel. The doctors managed to save several people by quickly dressing them in robes or pajamas. Medical records indicating that those people were just unemployed. This way, Anatoly Mikhailov, an employee of the local Department of Internal Affairs, spent all 4 days of the siege near Basaev. He's alive and well, but he didn't want to be interviewed. But his testimony later was very important for the investigation. I went into the head doctor's office with the children. We spent the first night there. But then the fear passed. They told us what they wanted from us. And somehow, what did they tell you? That they wanted to stop the war in Chechnya. That we had a right to call our relatives if we had phones. They gave me a landline phone. Did you call anybody? Yes. I called my husband's parents. I told them where we were and where our car was left. I said that the whole family was there. And that they needed to call all kinds of authorities and ask to stop the war in Chechnya. That's all they wanted. And that's what they came here for. Unfortunately, public opinion today thinks of the tragedy of Budyonnovsk as a tragedy of this small steppe town only. But in fact, nobody is thinking about what led to this tragedy and what happened after it. It's been diligently erased from the public mind. But in fact, the issue is much bigger, and this tragedy is not only about this small town of Budyonnovsk. This is a tragedy of the whole country, because the civil war began. A monstrous massacre began in Chechnya. By the time Basaev's squad entered Budyonnovsk, the war had been going on for 6 months. 26,000 civilians of the city of Grozny became victims of this war that lasted 6 months. They died under shells and bomb attacks during the storming of the city. This is a huge number of people who died in Chechnya itself. This is also 1,500 soldiers and officers who died in this useless war, which was beneficial only for the special services. Chechnya began to be called a rebellious republic long before the Budyonnovsk tragedy and the war. After the collapse of the USSR in 1991, the eccentric General Djokhar Dudayev came to power in Grozny, who was seeking, if not legal independence, but the maximum level of autonomy, the bargaining about the conditions that were happening between Moscow and Chechnya constantly. By the end of 1994, Chechnya, de facto, did not obey anyone. There was an internecine war going on inside between Dudayev's people and his enemies, which Moscow periodically supported. The situation radically changed in December 1994. On the advice of the military forces, Yeltsin decided to cut the knot and sent his troops into the republic to invade. This turned into a disaster. Following the failed New Year's storming of Grozny, a full-scale military operation and ruthless guerrilla warfare began. Violence on both sides quickly escalated to an extreme level. You need to imagine the general context of the attitude to the Chechen war of that time. In the journalistic area, and not only in that one, the attitude was pacifist, absolutely pacifist. It was radically different from the attitude to the Second Chechen War, which was already during Putin's rule. At the time, all sympathy was on the side of the Chechens because the memories of the publications were still fresh, and those publications were dedicated to the deportation of the Chechen people during World War II and during Stalin's deportations. This was the general mood in the journalistic area. Moreover, the Russian army was not really popular. The attitude that existed is difficult to imagine now, and it was universal. I remember it well. It was journalism even before Masyuk, because remember, Lena Masyuk would then be taken hostage by the Chechens. Yes, Yelena Masyuk was captured along with other Russian TV journalists. And then the attitude, including the one of journalists, toward the Chechens began to change. That's right. Chechen separatists and rebels gradually began to lose their romantic aura. We arrived in Grozny on December 14th, at the beginning of the war, and we negotiated with Dudayev. It was a difficult conversation. He made a strange impression. But during the negotiations, we got him to withdraw the concept of secession from Russia. On January 6th, Sergei Kovalev talked to Yeltsin. He spent 40 minutes convincing him. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Yeltsin listened to him in silence. And Sergei said, pick up the phone, call Dudayev, and there will be no war. Yeltsin answered, the time hasn't come yet. Was the presence of Russian troops in Chechnya a mistake? The military operation to capture Grozny was a mistake. We had practically no losses before the new year, 5 or 6 people on both sides. 2/3 of the region was already controlled by the feds. They moved freely around the flat part of Chechnya. Yes, they walked across the flatlands to Grozny. As for the storming of Grozny, those losses were huge. I also told Kushnin that the cities can't be taken with tanks. We had nowhere to retreat. You need to know what was going on in Chechnya in 1993 and 94. What? Constant hijackings of buses, planes. They happened every Thursday. They started kicking Russians out of Grozny. Therefore, carrying out the operation itself from the point of view of restoring order was right, but what happened with the storming of Grozny was a big military mistake. And then Maskhadov told me, when he became so-called president of the independent Ichkeria, he told me, we gathered in a small bunker. Dudayev was there. Basaev also came. In general, they understood that they had a hard time. Basaev then decided to go for a breakthrough. He wasn't going to take Budyonnovsk. He was going to take the airport in Mineralny Vody. And then there are different versions. Either he was supposed to only take hostages and take a plane. The second version, the captured bandits spoke about it, that they tried to fly to Moscow. There are 5,000 of us here. We've been here for 5 days. Look, there are children. All the men were led into the canteen. They were so cramped that they couldn't even stretch their legs. They were squatting with their legs tucked under them. They were heavily guarded. I came there with my daughter, Yulia. Yulia saw her father and rushed to him. One Chechen said, if you don't run, I'll let you go down with them. He said, would you run away from her? He said, well, then go. How am I supposed to run with this baby? She can't even walk yet. On the 3rd or 4th day, my husband was already with us. Here's a very important point. It was 1995, the first big terrorist attack with hostage taking. Of course, it was very cruel, but the kind of savage cruelty which we would see later, like in Beslan, where children were not given water for days, here in Budyonnovsk did not happen. On the contrary, many hostages remember that the terrorists showed some signs of humanity toward them. Because the generation of real lowlifes, let's call it the generation of ISIS, hadn't appeared yet. It was just about to appear. And these people, the Soviet Union had collapsed only 4 years before, remembered another life. And though they say that they're all warriors of Allah and have come here to die, in fact, they were afraid to die. In fact, they wanted to come and show off and survive. They put us here. And where did you sleep? On the floor? Where was there a place? Of course, near the walls. Were you eating anything during this time? The first evening when we were transferred here, we were fed. There was something from the kitchen. At 10 p.m., we were transferred here. I got 4 dessert spoons of what was left there. There were some kind of noodles. And that's all. Dessert spoons. Yes. And that's it. Yes. And how did the Chechens treat you? A lot of people ask about this. Were they rude to you, or did they do something inappropriate? We were just sitting against the walls, afraid to move. And once again, we tried not to go out, not to get caught. They told us what our troops were doing in Chechnya, how bad they were. And they decided to take this step, to stop the war. Did you feel any sympathy from these stories? Sympathy when you're forced to sit and someone's holding a machine gun over you, I don't think so. No, it was not sympathy. Probably it was a different feeling. Probably we didn't know much about what was happening in Chechnya. When you come face to face with people who have experienced something, it's like surprise, maybe something more, disappointment maybe. Sympathy was unlikely, although they had one girl, Rita. Together with them? Yes. She told me that her whole family had died, and she had joined this gang and was taking revenge for her loved ones. On the night of the 15th, high-ranking officials arrived from Moscow. FSB Director Stepashin, Minister of Internal Affairs Yerin, his deputy Yegorov, who would lead the operation, another Yegorov, the deputy prime minister. Their headquarters was in the building of the Department of Internal Affairs, the one that the bandits had attacked at the very beginning. Of course, one of the first tasks was to go to the hospital to understand what kind of people were there, what they wanted. This mission was entrusted to Vladimir Popov. He ran a local directorate for countering organized crime, like on the TV show Homeland. And Chechens were also serving in his group. One of them, Sharip Abdul Hajiev, was the first to enter the hospital. He contacted the terrorists, and among them, he saw his own brother, Aslanbek Abdul Hajiev. Aslanbek had the nickname Big Aslanbek. There was another one, Little Aslanbek, who was also one of the leaders. Both of those Aslanbeks were Shamil Basaev's closest henchmen, and Sharip came from the feds. Can you imagine that meeting? When Aslanbek saw him, he said, "Why are you here in the hospital?" Sharip told him, "Why did you come here? Do you want to fight? Go fight in the mountains, where the military is. Fight there. Here are only women and children. There's nothing to do here." Shamil demanded correspondence. He needed access to correspondence. Therefore, the terrorists told them what conditions were suitable for them, and they went to the headquarters and reported there what the situation was. The militants demanded this and that, such and such people among them. They reported about Little Aslanbek, Big Aslanbek, and Abu. Everyone they knew was identified. I'm a military field surgeon. I had military field surgery at the Institute. We learned that. I knew what an emergency was, who needed first aid, and who needed it urgently. I started selecting patients immediately, diagnosing them, organizing them. But the terrorists demanded that we deal with their people first, and not even those who were seriously wounded, simply people who needed a bandage changed. I objected. Guys, you can't. People are dying. Then a tall, red-haired man came up to me. He pressed a gun to my chest and said, "I'll shoot you like a dog. Treat this one." I said, "Call Shamil Basaev." They came to us right away. Shamil was sitting on the ground floor. When did you find out that Shamil was their leader? They said it themselves. Aslanbek came. He was tall. Big Aslanbek. Yes. I don't know what he said to him, but I never saw him again. Did you complain to him about something? I told him, if he kills me, then what? Who's going to do the surgery? Just don't get in the way. Don't let him get in the way. Why is he interfering? You have no one here. We'll do what it takes. We'll provide assistance at the highest level. Just don't get in the way. And he left. Go and work now, doctor, they said. No one's going to bother you. And why did you trust those Chechens who were working with you? The first day I said, if I deceive you in something at least once, all our relationships stop. If you deceive me, the situation is the same. What kind of relationship did you have? Purely human. We trusted each other. There was nothing else. Did you find out quickly that Basaev was leading this gang? Of course. People knew that the moment they came. If you know the story of Basaev, he's a professional terrorist. He hijacked a plane during the Soviet era. He led the so-called Abkhazia Battalion, which in 1992 shed blood during the war with Georgia. And Ardziba, who is now dead, presented him with the Golden Star of the Hero of Abkhazia. Apparently some of our comrades worked with him then, but not the FSB and not the FSK. At what point did your comrades work with him? 1992, in Georgia. Second day, the militants demanded correspondence to organize a press conference to put their demands forward.
пресс-конференцию организовать, чтобы они выдвинули свои требования. В штабе, знаете, вот как-то вот так вот.
The headquarters seemed to promise that. They promised to make it at 11 a.m. There were no correspondents. They promised it at noon, at 1 p.m. And at about 2 p.m., Basaev said if the correspondents were not allowed to pass, he would shoot the hostages. Moreover, he threatened to shoot 5 people every hour. And when no one was sent in at 2 p.m., they took 5 people out of the basement and shot them.
Они из подвала вывели 5 ребят и расстреляли их.
We were in the corridor of the Budyonnovsk hospital. It's clear that repairs have been carried out since then, but here, a part of the wall was left untouched on purpose. You see the traces of bullets, shrapnel, everything is burned, and here is an inscription that the bandits shot hostages at this place. Not clear what floor it was, but we know that it was the first day. When he didn't see the press at the assigned time, Basaev ordered the shooting of 5 people, and apparently they were people in uniform, policemen and military personnel. Then we offered to negotiate ourselves. They didn't object. Go and negotiate. To our question, why don't you let the correspondence pass? The answer was that the management was afraid for their safety. And after that, you went back to the hospital. Of course. And there was no desire just not to return? We couldn't help but come back. How could we not come back? First of all, our friends and our patients stayed there. We didn't even have a thought to stay. We returned back. About 20 correspondents were with us. How did you go through this dead zone? We walked through the dead zone very simply, with a white flag raised. A doctor in a white coat led us there. The doors, windows, and walls were covered in blood. There were even pieces of flesh there. As one person said later, a grenade had been thrown there. There were women and men sitting in the corridor. All of them were nearly naked. And everyone started crying at the same time. Save us, help us. And at this time, automatic weapons fire was heard from the street. Was it clear who was shooting? It was clear. The Chechens did not shoot first. And they were firing back. So in effect, a battle began, a shootout. I don't know who was shooting, but I was hit by a stray bullet. And you were wounded in the throat. Yes, the bullet went straight through. Probably God wanted me to be okay. We came there. We were invited to sit down. It was a little cramped in there. TV crews were putting up cameras. They were interfering with each other. But when everything settled down, Basaev came with a guard. Behind him were people with machine guns. You were told that that was Basaev. By that time, we already knew it was Basaev. Those who didn't know understood right away because Basaev was sitting in the center. He was the first. So it was clear he was the leader. Yes, of course. Did Basaev start talking or reading? No, Basaev didn't read anything. Lowering his head into the table, he spoke monotonously, saying that he did it all in order to stop the slaughter and the war in Chechnya. Did he speak loudly? Quietly. He spoke quietly. It seemed to me that he did not enjoy talking to us. I'm so tired of you. If I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't have even tried to see you all. So he made the impression of a military man. Yes. He made the impression of a bandit. There are such bandits. Kingpins or dons who hold in their fist everything that belongs to them or what they've put together. We started communicating with some journalists. Some of our guys went to them. On the second day, when it was clear that some people had died, including women in labor, Guys from the helicopter regiment tried to break through, but they were fired upon. And the town was starting to wind itself up. Who was in charge of the headquarters? Yegorov. Did you formally answer to him? No, I was just Sergei Stepashin, head of the FSB. Like Yerin, he was the Minister of Internal Affairs. To be honest, neither Yegorov nor I had to go there. It was purely emotional, because as soon as a large number of bosses appear, we lose operational control. Who negotiated with Basaev directly from the headquarters? Yegorov. Personally. And how was it organized? On the phone. The phone was there? Just dial and call. Then I called Anatoly Kulikov. He brought Shamil Basaev to me. He was Shamil's younger brother. This guy had a normal face, he was alive, completely unlike his brother. I talked to him personally. I said, come with me. He went to the hospital. He was given the conditions for the immediate withdrawal of troops, Yeltsin's direct negotiations with Dudaev, and recognition of independent Ichkeria. Those were absolutely impossible demands. Everyone could understand that. I said to him, this will not pass. Let's look for a compromise. He came back to me, already disheveled, and said, Sergei Vadimovich, I won't go there anymore. What happened? He's going to kill me, he answered. I said, well, all right. What would you do if you were me? He suggested to bring our whole family from Budyonnovsk, mother, father, relatives, about 20 people, put them in front of the hospital, and shoot them one by one. Maybe on the fifth one, he would let the hostages go. I said, are you an idiot? We would never do that. Then he answered, then you won't do anything. You don't know our psychology. That's the answer to all the negotiators and smart guys who were saying what they could have done back then. Without collusion, Kovalyov flew here from Germany. I flew from St. Petersburg. Kurochkin flew from Chita. Molostvov flew from Moscow. We flew to Budyonnovsk because we understood that there would be a massacre. Our generals don't care about civilians. They don't care about their own soldiers. They only need victory at any cost. And they don't care about the victims. Remind me, please, what fraction did you belong to in the State Duma? The Choice of Russia fraction. I must remind you that back then a State Duma deputy wasn't the same as now. Then the State Duma was more of a real parliament. There were different opinions. It was hot in there. There were deputies there, one of whom we are talking to now. One of the brightest was Sergei Kovalyov. They were just going there on the rights of people in authority, because a deputy was a legislative power. I explain this for those who do not understand what a deputy was back in the 1990s. Yes, back then the Democratic parties were in the minority in the State Duma, but still we represented a certain force and we could actively participate in events. What was Budyonnovsk like when you arrived? We got there at night. Crowds of locals with hunting rifles who fed on rumors that Chechens were there. They asked for weapons, but they did not receive any serious protection from anyone. Having reached Budyonnovsk, we tried to enter the headquarters, but they wouldn't let us into the headquarters. And the headquarters was located in the building of the Department of Internal Affairs? That's correct. They wouldn't let us into the headquarters. An employee of the local regional administration, Sergei Popov, came down to us. And he conveyed to us that the negotiations were going on, that they had brought Basaev's brother, that it was already night. He offered us to spend the night in the administration building in order to begin further work on resolving the situation in the morning. At 5 in the morning, we woke up from explosions, from bursts of machine gun fire, and we realized that the assault had begun, and we had been deceived. Was it your consensus that an assault was needed? Consensus in the discussion, and as for a specific decision, the decision is made by the chief military commander. It was a consensus, yes. Did you support it? Yes, I supported it. But with a caveat that Gusev should be given the opportunity to make final decisions about the form of the military operation, how it would take place. This is Alpha Group, sent by God. They knew better how to do it. You were transferred from Moscow, right? Yes, it happened because of an alarm on the 14th. Were you first placed in a cordon? We were first placed in a cordon. We stood there until the 16th, taking shifts on duty, peering in the direction of the hospital, and expecting that the enemy was now going to... So you were preparing for a defensive battle, not an offensive one. Back then, the conversation was only about the fact that they would break through, and we had to give them a decent rebuff, not to let them break through, and to inflict maximum damage on their manpower. For any operation involving special forces, an assault is immediately being prepared. It doesn't matter if it's there or not, whether there are negotiations or not. There's always a plan. It's always being prepared. And then everything is going as it is. You didn't have the opportunity to train on a similar building, as in other cases? At that time, we were not training. We didn't train, no matter what the opportunities were. It wasn't so back then. At 2 a.m., we were all assembled. Every unit was there. And then the commander came. We have aerial photography. We're going to approach from this side. The task of our department was to advance to the starting line, and at the command, storm, we had to extinguish the enemy's firing points. And from your backs, the others would advance. Yes, from our backs. Other teams of 3 were coming out, our comrades. And up the stairs. Yes, up the stairs. Someone did it with the help of a live ladder. You had a plan to eliminate Basaev. It was after the first time, when we went in and looked at everything. We had a target, which was Abu, because both Shamil and Abu were very audacious. We needed to eliminate both of them. Little Aslanbek was fighting in the Afghan war. He served in the special forces. It was still possible to talk to him somehow. And what was your plan to eliminate them? In the morning of the 17th, we had to come in and investigate everything again. We had to come out with weapons, with special equipment. And then we had to eliminate them. And you understood that you were likely to die too? Probably yes. Although, who knows? Many have already been there. We've talked to many. It turned out that way. Even if our plan hadn't worked, we could have stormed. They would say they failed the operation, so we launched an assault. But before the assault, I talked with Gusev, the commander of the Alpha. I asked him a question. What are the prospects for the assault, if there is an assault? He said 70% of Alpha will die. Almost all the hostages would also die. That is, they understood what could happen from the number of hostages, the number of fighters, from their equipment, their weapons. The guys decided to come in there. I went back. I went to the headquarters. On the stairs, I met the head of the precinct service, and he and I were housemates. He lived on the next floor. He was walking. He had a piece of paper in his hand. I asked, "Why are you in a hurry?" He said, "There will be an assault at 4 a.m. I got worried. What? An assault? Wait a minute. What kind of assault? And I ran back again. The general just sat on the floor with his legs stretched out. I said, "Vladimir Nikolaevich, why didn't you tell me there will be an assault?" "Volodya, it's too late." I warned him, "Vladimir Nikolaevich, you can't do that. There are women and children in there." He said, "I can't do anything. No one listens to me." I remember it clearly. I walked. I had no fear, no uncertainty, as some now describe this. We understood that we were all going to die. I thought nothing like that. I clearly understood that there were 100 of us, that we had a well-coordinated combat unit, that we were the people who had chosen this profession. We were ready to fight, to follow orders, and to win. I'm now asking many of my comrades, did anyone even know that there were 160 or 180 people? Some people say, yes, we knew. Did you know? No. How is that? Were you going to storm not knowing how many fighters the enemy had? I'm talking about what information I had as a machine gunner. I thought about 20 to 30 people. So at about 3:30, a police frequency came on. Two employees were talking to each other, and one said to the other, "Well, will it be at 4 a.m.?" And they were scolded. Turn off the transmitter. They were called all sorts of names. They had been talking for about 3 minutes. There was a button, you pressed it, and you said things. It was accidentally engaged. It was sat on. They usually sit on it. Did the Chechens listen to it too? They also had radios, but they took some away from the policemen. They knew well when the assault would be. Yes, they knew. And we were standing on the street, waiting. When I found out that there would be an assault, I learned about it from the militants. Were they preparing? Of course, they knew. Allegedly, they overheard a conversation of our special services in the ambulance radio that there would be an assault. I knew, but I didn't think it would be like this. And how was it? Unexpected. Everything just rattled and flew away. I didn't expect it. I heard hurrah, and then the shooting started. Hurrah? Yes, hurrah. Outside? Yes, outside. I heard shouts of hurrah. We all woke up from this. And shooting from all sides started? Yes, the shooting started. Naturally, we didn't understand right away what was going on. But then, when the plaster fell down and wounded people appeared, it all happened so quickly. Then, yes, already. We were shocked that could hear the shout of hurrah. Where? To whom? Where were they going? We started from the Capitol building, which was located 30 meters from the facade, carefully, without making unnecessary sounds. We went to the starting line. We retreated about 7 meters and came under terrible, heavy fire. If it had been at night, flying tracers would have made it as light as day. When we came out after the fight, one guy said, "We were soldiers in Chechnya. We've already lost some of us." But what we saw when the fight started, he even wrote to me, was there really the same density of fire in Stalingrad? Every window turned into a firing point. They heard a command. For some reason, without letting us all go out, I think they were scared. They started to shoot. So they started shooting first? Of course. I understand correctly that when a unit is storming a 4-story building, you are visible to the upper floors, even if you're lying down. Even for the first floors and basements. Do you know why? You saw the trees there now, but back then, there were twigs. Machine guns mowed these twigs like grass. Some of them were lucky. Others died. And then, so that they didn't shoot, we were put at the windows, and they told us, "Wave the sheets." And we stood there. And you stood there waving sheets? Absolutely. And shouted, "Don't shoot us." And what did you see in front of you, standing in the window? What could we see? There were soldiers. People were standing there. There was fog and smoke from the fire. Do you want to live? Get up there and shout, "Don't shoot." Did you do that? Of course I did. You went to the window. Yes, I went to the window. There were people standing with me, too. There were several people. But when you're screaming and you don't hear yourself, then they brought some men to make the shouting louder. I saw that on the base, near the bars, people were just tied up. They were moaning and crying, "Don't shoot." It could be heard even through this cannonade. I imagined that there was an enemy firing point. I saw that they were shooting from behind the hostage's back, but I clearly understood that I didn't have a needle that I could poke a piece of paper with. I understood that there, the fire was even harder. Yes, and single shooting was also hard. What I subsequently began to do, I shot single shots. No one believes me. A lot of people argue with me. But I believe that a professional never shoots bursts. I made a decision for myself that I couldn't use a machine gun from 30 meters to shoot at the window from where they were shooting at me. I understood that by accident I would hit the hostage, and there was a high probability that I would kill them. This is a psychological problem that I couldn't get over. When the assault happened, the roof caught fire, and the smoke started coming in. The mattresses caught fire in the infection department when they were shooting. It was such a peculiar smoke, acrid when it burns. The smoke was all up. The bottom section was transparent, and everything else, nothing was visible. And there were a lot of people in therapy who had difficulty moving around. That's why we dragged them on the mattresses. First, we pulled them out and pulled out some of the things they couldn't take out. We took them out to the lobby. And then we were already engaged in extinguishing the fire and eliminating the consequences. We put out the fire. You said that the first and last names were written on the bodies. Absolutely. They took a pen and wrote that I was so-and-so, Nadezhda Alyokhina, my birth year, because it was nearly death. We saw corpses. We saw how we were being killed, so that my relatives could identify me later. So you prepared like this in advance? Yes, absolutely. Apart from Alpha, did any other unit participate in the assault? Yes, of course. Vega participated, which is now Vimpel. Krasnodar Alpha also participated. They were in a difficult place, walking through an open field. This field was on the other side, which is opposite to the food hall, the morgue, and the garages. Were the Krasnodar people advancing from that side? Yes, they were supported by the 8th Detachment of Internal Troops. While the Alphas were shooting single shots, the other attackers, seen in these screenshots, were using grenade launchers. This is also on the video. We wanted to show it to you, and we wrote to the copyright holder, DGTRK, but they replied with a categorical refusal. They refused to provide these videos and to sell them. If you want, you can easily find them online. Here is the main hospital building. The stormers were coming from all sides, but the Alpha group came in from this side. This was the trauma department. There were hostages too. There were doctors. There were patients. Alpha released them. But we see that from the trauma to the main building was only 60 to 70 meters. It was impossible to get through because there were hostages in the windows. Bandits from behind their backs were firing, and retaliatory aimed fire was impossible. Alpha began losing people. Here, at this turn, the nearest distance was 40 meters from the building. 3 officers were killed there. They couldn't hit us from all sides with machine guns. We were standing behind a wall. And then we were just pelted with grenades from above. That's how the grenades were dropping on us. You were wounded by a grenade fragment? Yes, once. One wound was a grenade fragment. The most important thing is that it was my eye. What I saw there dispelled all my romantic attitudes about the war. Most importantly, about the war, yes. I finally understood for myself exactly that war is neither beautiful nor fair, nor honest, nor correct. War is dirt. This is the time when you do not understand where the enemy is, where your own people are, where someone else's people are. In one word, it can be called a mess, when in fact you're standing behind a major building, you look in the direction of the enemy who is firing at you, and then someone shoots at the edge from behind because they wanted to shoot. This is war. This is what war is like. My personal romantic attitudes toward war were gone. We didn't think it would ever end.
Мы считали, что...
I didn't think there would be an end to this.
Но мы не думали, что будет конец чему-то этому.
So you thought that they would kill you there? Yes. It was either them or us. Better us. But our soldiers were doing the shelling, and we were with them. You know, they say it was like Stockholm Syndrome? Yes. They had been there for 40 days. They already become related. And when our girls went outside with the kids, they were shouting, "They're good, don't kill them. Withdraw the troops. They want peace." This was a kind of self-defense, that they were the same as me. We were all the victims. We were there. We were being beaten from the outside. Do you understand? Do you think it was necessary to continue the assault? You know, I don't believe in such things, because I was an officer, I was a senior. It's been more than 25 years. We would have lost all the hostages then. We would have lost a lot of our people. We would have won, there's no doubt in that. We would have lost people, we would have lost hostages, but we would have won, we would have destroyed everyone. What would have happened later? When we think about it now, I was lucky. I had already been evacuated by this time. What did it lead to? Who can say now? Looking back, 30 hostages were killed, 70 were wounded. Do you think the decision to storm was a mistake or not? Look, Alexei, I'll talk to you cynically now. May God forgive me and the relatives of the victims. It was either 30 or 2,500 people. Either 30 or 2,500 people who were there. Why do you think that all 2,500 would have died? They would have just left the hospital. They couldn't stay there anymore. It was a suggestion by Big Aslanbek. He offered to negotiate. His suggestion was that if the security forces stopped the assault, then he would have released pregnant women and children. We agreed to this proposal. And how did you get out? There was a fight going on out there. I'll tell you how it was. We took a bed sheet, painted a red cross on it with lipstick, and the gunman opened the front door and waved, "Go ahead." We just jumped out and ran with this flag. And you got to the other side safely? We got there safely. We were picked up there. And I don't remember exactly, but we were taken to the headquarters somehow. 2 doctors jumped out of the hospital door in white coats with a white flag on some stick. And these were Kostyuchenko and Shipurina? Yes, it was them. They were running towards me. They were running to where I was, hiding behind an unfinished building. So they were running. They were actually running through a minefield. This was not their first trip. They were absolutely heroic people. They jumped out closer to me. I went out to meet them. I picked them up and led them away from the fire zone. And they were trembling. Their hearts were pounding. They were asking, "What are you doing? Where's the team? Where are the officers?" There wasn't a single officer around. Ultimately, I managed to find the office where Yeltsin was sitting. There was a guard there. He said that he would not accept doctors. They only let me in. I tried to say that what was happening was absolutely monstrous, that people were dying. According to doctors, dozens of people were killed in the hospital, and several dozen were seriously wounded. Yeltsin told me, "I know about it. I won't talk to the doctors. I don't need it at all. Everything is going according to the plan. We know what we're doing. Leave us alone and don't interfere." And what did you do next? Then I returned to the doctors and we went to the administration building where Kovalyov and our whole group were. We started calling Moscow, trying to contact Chernomyrdin to tell him what was going on. Kovalyov was calling, and we were sitting together in the office when he finally managed to contact Moscow, and we were saying things to him. We gave out all the information that actually existed, the number of hostages, what was happening here, and he was talking to Gaidar in front of us. We called Gaidar. We explained what was going on. There was a hard assault. Dozens of people were killed. Then he contacted Chernomyrdin and told him what was really going on. After that, for the whole day, we continued negotiations with Chernomyrdin through Gaidar. Did you talk directly with Chernomyrdin? Kovalyov did. Chernomyrdin called Kovalyov back, and they were already communicating directly, right? Yes. By evening, we had already spoken directly. Towards nightfall, we received a direct instruction from Chernomyrdin. Kovalyov received a direct instruction from Chernomyrdin. He instructed him to negotiate with Basaev and negotiate the rescue of the hostages. And at that moment, you went to the hospital? It was the next morning. Everyone wanted to live, absolutely everyone, including Shamil. We must pay tribute to Shamil. He was a very good psychologist. He knew what he was doing. And it was clear that they were all, especially after the assault, you should have seen them. Even at the moment when I started engaging Kashpirovsky in the process, when he tried to hypnotize people, Kashpirovsky was sitting, having put one leg on the other, and he was staring intently at Shamil. The big Aslanbek pushed him with his hand and said, "What, not working?" "No," he said. When the conference ended, I said, "Anatoly Mikhailovich." He stopped me. "Thank you, thank you." They began to leave, and he also left. A woman shouted, "Anatoly Mikhailovich, stay with us." He refused. "No, I have more important things to do." And then he went out. Long story short, Kashpirovsky wanted to hypnotize Basaev, but it didn't work out. Yes, he probably tried. We went in there. We climbed the stairs, found the residence room in which Basaev and his immediate entourage were sitting. And Basaev said, "Walk through the hospital and look what your people have done here." But it wasn't just our people who had done this. His people started it all by breaking into the town. At least 30 people died during the capture of the town. Arguing was meaningless. We went to see what had happened at the hospital. First, it was difficult to walk through the hospital because people were sitting, lying, and standing everywhere. We had to squeeze through, to step over wounded people, killed people, through pools of blood. As for Basaev, we didn't like him at that meeting. We talked to him. He had an epaulet here, something written in Arabic. Kovalyov asked him, "And what is this?" He gave an answer, and this is an ad. And it was a quote from the Quran. He called the quote from the Quran an ad. It was clear that he was a deeply cynical person. So this was just like a cheap decoration for him. Absolutely. He was deeply cynical. We formed such an impression about him. He didn't seem a pretty figure to us. The fact that we went to him and began to talk to him, it wasn't because we liked him. Kovalyov told Basaev, "Well, we need to look for a way out of the situation. But first, you have to take a step. Free the women and children." He thought about it and said, "Okay, but only after I hear Chernomyrdin agreeing to a ceasefire and to further negotiations." Therefore, this conversation, which everyone then saw on television, was a conversation after which he let go the last group of women and children. There were 111 women. The situation here was a complete mess. Yeltsin was drinking vodka in Halifax and making everyone there laugh. When I watched a video of him making Clinton laugh, to be honest, I felt bad. Seriously, Yeltsin threw everything on Chernomyrdin. Chernomyrdin was a business executive. He had one thought in his head: to save people. In the Russia of the victorious Putin, this concept is lacking. But in 1995, Chernomyrdin was one of those who was called a political heavyweight. He was a person who, under certain circumstances, could have applied for the post of president. By the way, a few years after these events, Chernomyrdin would really have such a chance. As for Yeltsin, it was still not clear why he decided to fly to Halifax, the knowing about Budyonnovsk. He himself did not fully explain it. Chernomyrdin was left to be the boss. He really was a business executive, a native of the Red Directors. He had spent his entire life in directorships in the oil and gas industry. He was a big boss, one of the founders of Gazprom. Of course, he was a very rich man, and everyone understood everything. But the people of that era still had the obkom way of living. They quickly became close friends. They drank vodka on holidays. They didn't watch their mouths with their friends. All of this was a kind of style. The thing they had, which is lacking now, and is almost impossible to imagine, was the feeling that in the recent past, we were all Soviet people, not just one family, but like-minded people. We were doing something together, some big thing. And whatever happens, you can always say, "Comrade, have you gone mad?" And it seems to me that this Sovietness made it possible for the Prime Minister to talk to a terrorist. They called you and said that they wanted to see you in Chernomyrdin's office. I don't want to tell a lie accidentally, so I won't say who it was. Maybe it was me who called. I don't remember now how I got there. The fact is that I got into his office. It was Chernomyrdin's office in the White House. Yes. When I went there, I couldn't imagine that there would be a conversation between Chernomyrdin and Basaev. He picked up the phone and said, "Shamil Basaev, can you hear me?" As far as I remember, he spoke to him informally. "Hello, Shamil Basaev," or something like that. "Hello, Shamil Basaev." Basaev was sitting in the chief doctor's office. I went to see him, and then the phone rang. "I'm asking for silence now. I'm having a conversation with Moscow." He picked up the phone, and then Shamil Basaev was heard. Shamil answered, "Yes." Viktor Stepanich asked him, "Speak up, Shamil Basaev." I was struck by the fact that he did not seem to follow the laws of the Russian language. He said his first and last name. He didn't say Shamil or Basaev or Citizen Basaev. He said Shamil Basaev. This is not common in Russian. I've been thinking about this. It seems to me Soviet business executives had a manner to refer to people by their name and patronymic and being informal. That was true. And here it was unclear how to address him. He was young enough to be Chernomyrdin's son, although what kind of son was he to him in other aspects? But by age, he could have been one. He didn't know how to address him, but then he came up with Shamil Basaev. That was the specific flavor, and everyone remembered it. How long did this conversation last? It felt like 7 minutes. Was that quite enough? It was. Listen, now you will see representatives who are in the hospital, and representatives of ministries and of the Stavropol territory. It struck me that this is not a bureaucratic situation requiring a quick reaction, requiring very strong nerves connected with saving lives, and not with communication with subordinates or superiors. Basaev was not his subordinate and not his boss. Chernomyrdin was very organic, very natural. There was an impression that he wasn't worried. Let the women, patients, and children go. They're going to stay. I repeat, there will still be some people. Release the women and children. Did you know that Chernomyrdin personally called Basaev? I saw him on TV. In the operating room, there was a small portable TV, and we saw him there. We saw both Chernomyrdin and Basaev. How did you find out about Chernomyrdin's conversation? TV. And everyone else at the headquarters? Of course, we turned on the TV and saw it. So the headquarters, Yegorov, the commander of the operation, didn't know Chernomyrdin would be calling? No, it was a surprise for us. We were told, turn on the TV. And here we were, sitting and watching. There were important officers. They signed the agreement. Chernomyrdin signed the agreement, where both Kovalyov and Basaev put their signatures. And there were also representatives of the administration of Budyonnovsk. So I didn't know why it was so unexpected. This was very expected. The agreement was signed, and Chernomyrdin was calling. Then there was almost a day of bargaining. A deal was drawn up about who had to do what, and who was supposed to behave how. How did this all happen? A stumbling block at the first stage was that first, Basaev at a press conference made his first demand clear. It was immediate withdrawal of Russian troops from Chechnya. And Kovalyov had to talk on the phone with Basaev and convince him that he was making impossible demands. Those were technically impossible requirements. In the end, Basaev agreed that it was technically impossible and withdrew this requirement. The agreement was being created with difficulty. Then Viktor Stepanovich called. I went to talk to him on the phone. Through a close connection in the trailer? Yes. After that, the hostages, more precisely, not hostages, but those who were ready to go with the bandits. Did they release the hostages? Yes. We found some buses, some Icarus buses. They weren't equipped. There were different versions here. They broke down because they were Icarus buses. We just didn't have time to equip them. Equip them with what? So that they wouldn't arrive. That is, to mine them. It could have been so. While the gang arrived in 3 Kamaz trucks, it left on 3 Icarus buses. There were buses and a refrigerator where they put the bodies of the murdered bandits. They were being driven here. This is the main entrance to the hospital. Along with the bandits, there were about 200 of them, about 100 hostages, and about 20 journalists were taken away. There were also several people's deputies, including Sergei Kovalyov. Our friend Vladimir Popov also went there. What's interesting, everyone who got on buses did it voluntarily. That is, they were no longer formally hostages. And moreover, the operational headquarters tried to take a paper from every one of them which said, I'm voluntarily joining Basaev's gang and I realize the consequences of my decision. No one signed it? No, of course not. No, they didn't sign it. Then they gave us another piece of paper to sign. I'll show you now. We signed this piece of paper. I agree to accompany Shamil Basaev's group voluntarily without preconditions. I'm aware of the responsibility for the decision made. Yes, and the first piece of paper was like this. It was a ticket to prison. That was offered to be signed. Yes. I voluntarily joined Basaev's bandit group. I go with it to the Chechen Republic, realizing all the possible consequences of my decision. That was powerful. Yes, it was. Everyone immediately shouted, we're all going. I was in the hospital, but at some point my camera battery died and we ran out of film for the camera. I understood that if the column gathered and left, then I was just going for nothing. I approached Basaev and I said, I would like to go to the city, take a charging port, to get some films, because I'm out of it. He said, okay, go. I said, okay, can I get back in time? He said, this is already your business, whether you have time or you don't. After that, I took everything, got ready for a long journey. I ran back to the hospital. I met Lysyuk. He was from the Vityaz group of special forces of the internal troops. We knew each other from Abkhazia and other points. He asked me a question, where are you going? I said, the bus group is being formed from hostages. He said, be careful, because we will free you. Take care of yourself. I said, I see. I'll take care of myself. When it came to the volunteers who should go with him, he suggested that Kurochkin and I go to the hospital and collect a hostage for each militant. It was more than 100 people. I thought about it and refused. I understood that most likely we wouldn't make it, that there would be an attack and we would die. A lot of people would die. Therefore, I didn't go and persuade people to go to death. without telling them about it. And Victor, too. We said, no, we're not going. Then he told the doctors to do it, and the doctors went there. The doctors went there and brought about 70 to 80 people with them. The number of people willing to take a risk was so. There weren't enough. And then a girl of 18 or 19 years stood up, either the hostage or the nurse. She said, well, if the men are done, then sign me up. Then the men felt ashamed, and they found a sufficient number of people. How did you end up on the bus? They announced, if you want to live, we need to leave. We're taking hostages with us. Only in that case will you be released. We need volunteers. Did you volunteer? Yes. Why? Many men did not do this. I was asked this question. I thought it would be the right thing to do. That I could do it. Why not? Did you realize that this could end by being shot at and dying? I understood that it was very frightening, yes. But for some reason, I was sure that nothing would happen to me. I ended up on the bus. General Medveditsky came in several times, and when we went in with him again, he told me, Volodya, I'm going to accompany the column. I said, Victor Konstantinovich, I'll go too. He was a lieutenant general, a head of the department, a normal, decent man. He said, let's do this. I'm going to the border with Chechnya, and you'll go further along to Chechnya. I said, all right. But when they began to surround us in the Kursk region, before Mozdok, I went out. There was an escort car of Stavropol traffic cops. There was an ensign, a sergeant, and a major. I went up to the major and said, Commander, where's the general? He asked, what general? I said, Medveditsky. He said, there was no one. That's what I asked for. The column left Budyonnovsk and followed the same road that the militants had arrived on, and was going toward Chechnya through Dagestan. They would have been on their way for 2 days. The fact that the column was going to be stormed was obvious to everyone. Helicopters were flying over it constantly. Several times they even entered the combat course. Soldiers and military equipment could be seen along the road. It was known that the order to attack constantly, repeatedly, was painfully discussed in various offices, but no one gave any of it away. Pavel Rodichev, who was the commandant in Budyonnovsk, was also a commander of the helicopter regiment. Some boss called him without introducing himself and said, get a helicopter in the air as soon as the column departs, a few kilometers from Budyonnovsk. You need to destroy them. To which Rodichev replied, please give me a written command. It makes sense. I'll call you back. And that's it? No, that's not it. He received another call in half an hour. General Ivanov is speaking to you. Ivanov was a military pseudonym for Zhukov and Stalin. And who was that person? It was unknown who it was. General Ivanov. He said, I don't know you. If there's a written order, I'll get the choppers in the air. But just in case, he did get one chopper in the air. But no one gave a written order. If there was a written order, there would have been another conversation. They wanted to present the case that the helicopter pilots did it themselves out of a sense of revenge. Yes, by themselves, that's right. Revenge. Their comrades had been killed. I think it's true. Remember, a similar case was with Grachev, when Grachev also demanded a written order. In 1993, in the Moscow three-day civil war, Yeltsin ordered him to shoot the White House. Grachev said, give me a written order. Yes, no one signed a written order here either. Because no one wanted to take the responsibility. No one wanted to take responsibility. And if at least one shot had thundered, a skirmish would have started. Everything would have been there. On the border with Ossetia, 1.5 kilometers from the border, there was an ambush, supposed to defeat the entire column. But the fact is that Galazov, who was then president of Ossetia, didn't want it to happen on his territory. Ossetians had very tense relations with neighboring peoples. Galazov did not want to allow such a massacre to take place on his territory. He found a good eastern way out of the situation. He sent several buses and trucks to meet us. He sent people with guns and posters with "We will not let terrorists on our land" written on the posters. They drove in and stood in front of the ambush, which was supposed to destroy us. And then they turned you around and you went through Dagestan. And then the helicopters dropped missiles in front of our column and stopped it. They handed over the order to turn the column around, and we went the other way. There was a funny story that Basaev was handed an order where it was written, "Shamil Basaev has been ordered to go a different way." That's right. I got off the bus at that moment. I saw how Basaev was sitting on the stairs of the first bus, holding this paper in his hands and saying, "Is he my commander or something? What did he send me an order for?" I called Chernomyrdin and said, "I won't let them into Grozny." "How?" he asked. "Somehow," I answered. I wrote an order to Basaev that we were changing the route. He didn't want to do it for a long time. However, he did as it had been written. Yes, because it was clear that the helicopters were hanging over us, and one rocket had already exploded in front of us. It was clear that it was necessary to turn around. I will not hide it. There were bosses who said, "Burn them together with the hostages." I understood that 114 people could die. We were tied hand and foot. In addition, sometimes there was also a direct betrayal. When we cornered them almost to the mountains, the operation began in 3 directions in the gorge, and I received a telegram from Yeltsin. Do not use aviation. Do not explain the reason for that. Then you reached Dagestan. Yes, we were standing in Khasavyurt for 5 hours. And how did people meet the buses there? There were a lot of people. They were greeting us and hooting. So they were already considered heroes there, right? Yes, the residents clearly supported them. Here we were held hostage, we were under fire, and they came there as if to their own home. They came out shouting, "Peace, peace, the war is over, we will live." And the whole crowd in the square rejoiced and welcomed them, not as winners, but as those who had brought them peace. Before entering Zandak, we climbed the Serpentine for a long time. We drove hard. The bus drivers were not used to driving on a serpentine. They were people from the steppe. People were running down from the village. The bandits instantly disappeared somewhere. Did they mix up with the locals? Yes, they got mixed up and they ran up. When we got there, everyone had already got off the buses. Basaev came out, took off his hat, and said, "I treated you as if I was a dog, but I had no other choice. I had to save my people." And they left, and we went back. The Kobzik bus came from somewhere. We quickly got into this Kobzik, and we were taken to the federal post. All our people were already standing here. A bottle of brandy appeared from somewhere. We opened it, passed it around. Everyone took a sip, Kovalyov and all the others. I remember the cognac was in my bag. We passed it around, drinking from the bottle. Everyone was drinking. Even Sergei Adamovich took a sip, I think. Somewhere around noon on the 21st, we had already arrived here. How were you greeted here? People were all on the square. The buses went there. We were greeted with tears. Those who were still alive got off the bus. I saw my mom. She was also in the square. She hadn't known what had happened to me until the last moment, because there were many lists written and rewritten. I wasn't on any of the lists. Of course, no one from the leaders of the gang that captured Budyonnovsk has lived to this day. Basaev was the last one to die in an explosion in 2006. Many terrorists were later caught and convicted. Some have already been released, but many were never caught. And according to unofficial but pretty reliable information, they live quite peacefully in Chechnya. I know of 5 of them, and I know where they are. Are they in Chechnya? They are. They are hiding, and they understand that sooner or later they will have to answer. Do you think that they will have to? They will. They definitely will. To be honest, there was a kind of resentment that they aren't being punished. There was a grudge, and we talked to each other. What if suddenly our people advanced, then we were ready to help, to try to attack them, to take away their weapons? Really? Yes, there were such thoughts and conversations, but only in a narrow circle. If we had destroyed those 160 militants and Basaev in 1995, first of all, we would have destroyed a huge number of militants, and secondly, we wouldn't have given them this taste of victory. We wouldn't have lost at least 10 years. There would have been no second Chechen war, and then there would have been no explosions of houses, no explosions in the subway, no Nordost, no Beslan. Absolutely. There would have been no Nordost. There would have been no Kislyar. Why? After that, Shamil wasn't there. Shamil turned everyone on. Shamil was a leader in this regard. He personally did not participate in either Kislyar or Nordost, but he was the organizer. I wouldn't link it directly because there was a large number of field commanders in Chechnya who could afford such bloody terrorist attacks that happened later. And to put shame on Basaev that he organized everything, this is a very simplified scheme, a very convenient, simplified scheme that Basaev organized everything back then. They would have organized it before Basaev because Basaev was not the main one. The main thing is the reasons. The reason was the Chechen War. If there had been no Chechen war, there would have been no Basaev or Budyonnovsk. If the terrorist had been destroyed then, would Nordost and Beslan have happened anyway? Of course. Of course. Because there were different groups who carried out the terror in Beslan and who was in the Nordost. And there was Basaev. He didn't organize the Beslan tragedy. And it's no coincidence that Ruslan Aushev made an agreement with Maskhadov, and Maskhadov was already on his way. Why did they quickly decide to storm Beslan? Because they were afraid that Maskhadov would drive up and make an agreement. And that there would be another Budyonnovsk? Yes, another Budyonnovsk. I'm still fighting. I still have dreams about something like this. For a long time, I couldn't stay near an open window. I was in a panic state. Whenever I would come into a room, I would automatically look for a safe place. Some people offered you a vacation, rehabilitation, and compensation after all this. Is that right? I received some kind of compensation. It was 600 rubles. A letter verifying that Nadezhda Nikolaevna Alyokhina, in the criminal case of the attack on Budyonnovsk, was recognized as a victim. So, and what is this paper based on? Here is written financial assistance in the amount of 600,000 rubles because of protocol number 8 from 1995. This was before the devaluation. 600,000 rubles are 600 rubles now. Have you been compensated for everything? 600 rubles. Like everyone else? Yes. And what did you do with these 600 rubles? I bought myself a tape recorder for my car. And that's it? That's it. Did you go to Budyonnovsk afterward? Victor Stepanovich went, but I didn't. It was the hardest trip in all his political activity as a prime minister. Why? Because there was a meeting with the relatives of the dead. To his face, what is in the hearts, in despair and in tears, was said. That there was no government, that this was allowed, that no one will protect us. It was clear that the emotional component was at its limit. My mother, let her soul rest in heaven, always said, I'm putting a candle for Chernomyrdin's health. Why? Because it's only thanks to him that you're alive. That was my mom's opinion. Because she was there, standing near the hospital at the age of 90. Who invented this, that you can't talk, you can't negotiate? But how else, if the lives of so many people are at stake? Should the rule take precedence over people's lives? That this is some kind of paradigm. Don't negotiate. You can't talk. You can only use guns. Is this some kind of rule? Who made it? Terrorists, including Basaev himself, were caught. Somebody was killed, somebody was imprisoned. In this sense, Chernomyrdin showed the power of the authorities. Because what is the power? Not to destroy everyone, but to save. In my opinion, this is the power. Do not allow it. And if you did, then save people. And he did save them. Then Pervomaisk happened, where Yeltsin was the leader. But it wasn't mostly Yeltsin, but the security forces surrounding him. And everyone knows how it ended, when the hostages were released with the help of aviation and artillery. And they failed everything that could be failed by killing a lot of people. My mom talked about it later. It was very scary. I'm very glad that I don't remember anything from those days. It's just that I have a child of the same age now. 10 months? She's almost a year old. And I don't know. I probably wouldn't have survived that. The First Chechen War, the termination of which the terrorists demanded in Budyonnovsk after the terrorist attack, of course, would not stop. It would continue for another year and a half, ending only in 1996, when there would be profound political reasons to do this in Moscow. It was a presidential election. The question of whether Chernomyrdin was right, and what was primary for us, saving people's lives or destroying terrorists, is still open in Russia. And it seems to me it has only become sharper over these 25 years. How to answer this question? On our channel, you answer such questions yourself. One thing I can say for sure. The Prime Minister will not talk to the leader of the terrorists, no matter how many lives are at stake. This was Redakция. Leave your comments and likes here. See you soon.